Before the Islamic Revolution of 1979, Iran experienced a period of significant transformation and rapid modernization under the rule of Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi. This era, spanning the mid-20th century, was marked by economic development, social liberalization, and cultural shifts, but also by growing social disparities and political repression that ultimately paved the way for revolution. The post-World War II era in Iran saw an ambitious modernization campaign led by the Shah, particularly through the White Revolution reforms of the 1960s. The Shah's policies aimed to transform Iran into a modern, industrialized nation. The economy flourished due to the country's vast oil wealth. Infrastructure projects such as the development of highways, dams, and industrial centers proliferated, and Iran's urban centers expanded rapidly. Oil revenues were used to fund modernization efforts, including advancements in healthcare, education, and urban development. Tehran, the capital, transformed into a bustling modern city with Western-style amenities and luxury. Growing middle-class prosperity brought a shift in lifestyle, and consumer culture began to mirror that of Europe and the United States. However, rural areas often lagged behind, and inequalities in wealth distribution became increasingly pronounced. The Pahlavi era also brought about significant social change. The Shah and his policies promoted secularism and westernization, with efforts to diminish the influence of traditional religious authorities. Women's rights advanced substantially during this period. Women were granted the right to vote in 1963, and the Family Protection Law of 1967 gave them greater rights in marriage and divorce. Girls had increasing access to education, and women began to enter universities and the workforce in greater numbers. Cultural life reflected an openness to Western influences. Fashion, music, and art became symbols of modernization. Cities like Tehran hosted cinemas, concert halls, and art exhibitions. Popular music blended traditional Persian melodies with Western pop, and discos became a feature of nightlife among Iran's affluent youth. This westernization, however, alienated more traditional and religious segments of society who viewed these changes as a threat to Islamic and Persian cultural values. While the Shah's policies aimed to modernize Iran economically and culturally, the political landscape was marked by authoritarian rule and the suppression of dissent. The Shah centralized power and used the Savak, the secret police, to stifle political opposition. Political parties and critical voices were harshly repressed, and Iran's parliament served largely as a ceremonial body with limited power. The regime's close relationship with Western powers, particularly the United States, further fueled dissatisfaction. Many Iranians resented the Shah's dependence on foreign advisors and saw his Western-oriented policies as compromising Iran's sovereignty and cultural identity. Land reforms under the White Revolution displaced many peasants, leading to widespread discontent in rural areas. Life in pre-revolutionary Iran was markedly different depending on one's class, location, and outlook. In urban centers such as Tehran, Shiraz, and Isfahan, affluent Iranians enjoyed modern conveniences, higher education, and leisure activities. Western fashion and culture became prevalent in the lives of the urban elite. Universities were modernizing, and Iran welcomed foreign investment and ideas. Conversely, the rural population often experienced hardship. Land reforms failed to deliver promised benefits, and poverty persisted in many areas outside the cities. Access to modern education, healthcare, and infrastructure remained limited for many rural Iranians. This urban-rural divide deepened dissatisfaction among segments of the population who felt excluded from the promises of modernization. Despite the Shah's push for secular modernization, religion remained a fundamental part of life for many Iranians. Traditional religious leaders, or ulama, were influential in rural areas and among lower-income groups, many of whom saw modernization as eroding Islamic and cultural values. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a prominent cleric exiled in the 1960s for opposing the Shah, emerged as a unifying figure for those dissatisfied with the regime's policies. By the late 1970s, discontent had reached a breaking point. While Iran had achieved notable economic growth and social reforms, the uneven distribution of wealth, suppression of political freedoms, and perceived westernization created a perfect storm of unrest. Economic problems, rising inflation, and cultural tensions intensified grievances, leading to widespread protests and opposition to the Shah's regime. Iran's traditional values, Islamic identity, and calls for social justice became rallying cries for millions of Iranians who desired change. Life in Iran before the 1979 revolution was complex and marked by significant achievements as well as deep social and political contradictions. The Shah's vision for a modern, westernized Iran brought both prosperity and alienation, with rapid urbanization and liberalization benefiting certain groups while marginalizing others. The cultural clash between modernity and tradition, combined with growing social inequalities and political repression, set the stage for the revolution that would transform the nation forever. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, you may share, subscribe, like, or comment for more.